Hey, gorgeous people. Happy Monday morning, August 4th. One of the most exciting astrological weeks of the year is finally here. I have been looking forward to this week all year. I've been talking with clients about it since last November. Mars is moving into Libra and kicking off a series of grand air trines to Pluto in Aquarius and to Uranus in Gemini that are going to last us this year until October and will repeat every Libra season for the next 8 years while Uranus is in Gemini. We also have a pretty fun, chaotic, eclectic full moon in Aquarius that we're going to talk about. And all these things are pretty much related. We're going to have a free flowing conversation about all of that. I actually got so many really sweet text messages and DMs from clients and friends who were reaching out to tell me that they followed my instructions on last week's video and they went back and they looked at what was going on during the Mercury Cazimi on February 8th, 2025. And I got so many of those messages that I decided to, in the middle of my workday, go back and look at my diary. And I'm actually going to do something so vulnerable and read to you from my journal. Sunday, February 9th. Yesterday, I went to get coffee and I got in the car to head back. I felt it for a moment. Windows down, music on, sun shining on my face. And just for the briefest moment, I felt joy. I felt happy. It was in contrast to my life euphoric. I immediately began to cry openly, and I realized I hadn't felt that way for years. I felt it for a moment, just a simple, happy, good day, and immediately broke down sobbing. I thanked Odin. Now, although I am a cliched melancholic yearner at my best, I am no longer a melancholic depressive at my worst. So, even though that journal sounds pretty extreme, just know that postpartum is a hard time for women. And if you have friends or family members who have given birth to a baby, make sure that you check up on them and you're sending them material amounts of support and love and text messages and music they can listen to so they can feel like their cool old selves again. All right, transits. It really looks more complicated than it is because at the start of the week, Mars moves into Libra. And when Mars does that, it will simultaneously be trining Pluto in Aquarius. It will also be trining Uranus in Gemini. It will also be opposing Saturn and Neptune in Mars ruled Aries. So, this is actually what is called a kite formation. It's not just a grand trine. The grand trine you can see is the big triangle between the air signs. It always happens with signs of the same element. We also have this backbone of the opposition between Mars and Saturn and Neptune. So technically, all of these transits happen to their moment of exactitude at slightly different times throughout this couple day period. But basically, from the 8th through the 10th, Mars will come into and form up this kite formation. The moon this week moves from Sagittarius to Pisces, crossing through the sign of her detriment of Capricorn, and then also crossing over Pluto in Aquarius. All right, here we are. I've been talking about it all year. Mars is officially moving into Libra and forming up the Grand Air Trine. Now, this Grand Air Trine with Mars will last a few days, but Mercury, the Sun, and Venus all come through Libra and form up this Grand Air Trine between now in mid October. So in September, Mercury and the Sun will come in. And then in October, Venus comes in and forms up the same exact formation. The cool thing is, after that, it turns into a grand water trine. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk for a minute about what an air trine is and what is a grand trine. A trine is an aspect in astrology that forms a 120-degree line. And when there are three of them, they form a big triangle in the chart. You can see it right here. Grand trines are of the nature of Jupiter, which means that they are supportive, they are expansive. They kind of act like buttresses that support a wall or a roof. They are amplifying times when a little bit of effort can really go a long way. And a grand trine is amplifying in an even stronger way. So, in a minute, I'm going to tell you, based on your rising sign, which triad of houses this grand trine is stretching across. And that's an area where you could put in a little bit of effort, just whatever you can summon up the energy for, and you might really see an outsized result during this time. Let's start right here with the razor sharp intellect of a grand air trine between Uranus, Pluto, and Mars to begin with. Now, in some ways, I feel like this is the most difficult of these trines just because Mars is not that happy in Libra and Mars can be difficult for some people. Now, Mars is actually hosting Saturn in Aries, which is ruled by Mars, and Saturn to some extent is kind of hosting Mars as well. Because Saturn rules Libra, by exaltation. Now, this isn't a formal sort of mixed dignity, but it's really just a way of saying that Saturn and Mars have some kind of understanding of what each other is going through, even if they don't know how to make the most of the place that they're in. The way that Mars Saturn Neptune opposition is reading to me is like Saturn and Neptune are in a hot, sticky jungle doing some kind of covert military work. They are desk jockeys. They are not used to the military work. They are used to being in charge. They're on like one of those crackly old phones. They can't get service at all. And they're trying to call Mars for directions on what to do. And meanwhile, Mars is at headquarters. Mars is used to being boots on the ground. And they're kind of trying to phone instructions into each other, but they're both deeply out of their element. Mars doesn't know what the protocol is or how to actually issue the instructions in a way that makes sense. They're kind of having this tense exchange across the way, but there's a lot of support for all of the planets involved because even Pluto and Uranus are actually sextiling Saturn and Neptune. So all of the outer planets have this insane synastry this year. That's part of why this year has been looked at as so transformational by so many astrologers. But Mars is coming in and tightening it all up together into something that feels very personal. The air trine to me really feels like deeply intellectual. It feels like new neural pathways unfolding in real time to conquer things in ways you may not have thought of. I think this is in some ways really related to the recentness of Uranus coming into Gemini. We really haven't had that long to get used to what that feels like. Whereas Pluto has been coming in and out of Aquarius since March 2023. And we have planets in Libra every single Libra season. But this is conjuring up the imagery for me of a sword swiping through, slicing a silk ribbon floating on the breeze. Like it is razor sharp intellect. There's also something a little revolutionary about it, like the possibility of something truly breaking the mold and transforming the situation into something that it wasn't before. One of the things that was really coming up for me was the video game Cyberpunk 2077, which I am a diehard for. But thinking about the class of individual in that game that you can play called Netrunner, where you are the kind of person whose whole existence is so predicated on ideas and information that these people actually wear cooling suits on their body. Like their bodies are the meat computers for their own thoughts running the internet. And at some point, a couple of characters are revealed to have uploaded themselves into the cloud, essentially. It sounds horribly corny, but it's actually one of the most emotionally devastating games I've ever played. It really reminds me of the character Songbird in the Phantom Liberty expansion, which was actually incredible. And I think there's a little bit of body horror in there as well when we think about some of these cyberpunk themes. And transhumanism is something I expect to hear a lot more of as technology develops and Uranus makes its way deeper into Gemini. But some of these characters choose to have elective surgeries to upgrade their body parts into more advanced body parts that are made of technology. I think we're really going to see the benefit of Jupiter and Venus in Cancer, grounding us into our bodies a little bit. I'm actually so grateful that Jupiter is in Cancer for that reason as Uranus comes into Gemini, because we all get to remember we are in a body and we are not just made of brains and ideas. I think otherwise this might be a pretty cerebral transit. Now, we talked about Uranus and Gemini being a wild card, but frankly, Mars is also a little bit of a wild card. Across my client practice, I'll say that Mars has the most diversity of experiences associated with it of any planet, and it's actually not even close. Comment below if you want me to make a video about Mars in the natal chart. But if you're curious about your relationship to Mars, I would encourage you to go about that in one of a few ways. Now, you can just sit down and have a think about martial topics, things that you associate with Mars, and see what your gut instinct is and how you relate to them. I find that this is reliably a way to find out people's natal relationship to any planet, is to just surface some of the archetypal themes and see their native resistance or excitement to those themes. Now, if martial topics really sound icky to you, that may be a clue that Mars is not one of your most symbiotic planets or a planet that you particularly enjoy working with. You can also go back and look at Mars retrogrades and track how those Mars retrogrades have unfolded over time. Now, I have a Mars retrograde worksheet that tracks Mars retrogrades back through 1960. And you could just go through there and find a time when Mars retrograded over a significant natal planet for you. For example, if you have the sun in Libra, you could go back and look for a Mars retrograde in Libra and and think to yourself, hey, was that a difficult time? Was that a time when I was so overwhelmed and so much was happening to me and I was having chaotic events every day? Or if Mars is kind of a neutral or positive planet for you, it might be a time when actively auspicious things happen to you. Or for most people who have a neutral Mars, a time when you felt like nothing was going on and you were really bored. I'm going to link that Mars retrograde worksheet in the comments below. Go check it out. Now, if you don't have a great relationship with Mars and you know that, or if you're wondering, do I have a good relationship with Mars? It's never a bad time to do some Mars remediation. That would be doing Marsy things on Tuesdays or wearing maybe the color red or purple. That's what I associate with Mars. Doing some kind of martial activity, physical fitness, martial arts, debate, Jackson Pollock style flinging of paint as art. All of it counts. I think it's important to note that the moon actually crosses over into Aquarius to be with Pluto in Aquarius at the time that these trines start popping off. And it doesn't feel like a coincidence that the full moon that occurs this week is also with the moon in Aquarius. Because the moon is emphasizing and weaving and bringing these significations down into our bodies here on Earth, maybe even acting like a conduit or a lightning rod because of Jupiter in Cancer. This is just a really interesting week because there are so many different conditions of dignity implied in what's happening here. Saturn is actually in fall in Aries. Mars is in detriment in Libra. The moon is not that happy in Aquarius. Meanwhile, the sun is in its domicile in Leo, and we have Jupiter in the sign of its exaltation in Cancer. Plus, we have Mercury still retrograding back through Leo. So this is one of those transits where everything kind of feels like a big, strange, mixed bag. There's some good, there's some bad, and the things at the extremes kind of balance each other out. So the good things seem really good, and the difficult things actually seem quite difficult, but they all kind of seem balanced weight wise. Now, if you don't know who your annual perfection Time Lord is, I would highly recommend checking that out. You can use a calculator on AstroSeek or many other websites to figure out who your Time Lord is. That planet is who you want to locate in this mess, whose transits you actually want to track during all of this. If you need help calculating your annual perfection ruler, you can comment your rising sign and your exact age, and I will tell you who it is. Now let's get into this full moon in Aquarius because the full moon feels so tied into what's happening with these grand air trines. They don't actually feel like different events. However, this full moon is actually taking place at 16 degrees, 59 minutes of Aquarius, which is where the solar eclipse will happen essentially on February 6th, 2027. It will happen at 17 degrees. So within just a couple minutes of right here on the wheel of the zodiac. Now, we talked last week about the ways that transits can foreshadow the events of eclipses. And that's important because eclipses are notoriously hard to predict. So definitely make sure that you're documenting some of the things that are going on in your life this week, even if it's just some simple notes in your journal or some pictures or some emails you send to yourself. But you're going to want to look back at this when you start thinking about that 2027 eclipse at 17 Aquarius. Now, part of what's happening in my chaotic Gemini brain when I'm thinking about a week like this, where every planet is really on its own journey, but they're all clearly tied in together, is that it reminds me of those chaotic movies where it seems like there's 1,000 plot lines, but they're all driven together by one narrative vector. It was totally reminding me of the excellent movie Death of Stalin that came out a few years ago, and also kind of the Grand Budapest Hotel, the Wes Anderson movie. I haven't actually seen, but because I know Wes Anderson, I know that movie is just like what I'm talking about. There's one narrative vector, but I guarantee all those people in the ensemble cast maybe come in for one or two lines and you're like, oh, they're in this movie. And they seem weirdly, some of them out of context, but some of them seem really well situated in the context, just like all of the crazy plot lines in Death of Stalin that are driven by this one narrative vector. Now, for me, that narrative vector is the full moon in Aquarius, and it's also kind of that kite backbone of Mars and Saturn and Neptune all opposing one another. It's also important to note that Uranus will be in Gemini until 2033, and Pluto will be in Aquarius even longer than that. So for the next 8 years, every single Libra season will echo what goes on in this first Grand Air Trine period. Now, Uranus moves faster than Pluto, so the trines won't be exact in the way that they are this year. This is the sharpest point of what's happening here. It is the beginning of the spiral path. But every year during Libra season, those trines will form up first to Pluto in earlier Aquarius, then to Uranus in the middle of Gemini. It will happen every year, just like we explored earlier in the year with the Mars Pluto oppositions and how those collapsed over time. We talk about the spiralicious path of astrology. It's back again, and it's going to be happening and unfolding across these air signs to some extent for the next 8 years. So make sure that you plant some seeds during this time period, starting right now and heading all the way in to mid October. Plant the seeds that you want to reap the benefits of for the next 8 years. The beauty of the Grand Air Trines is that it doesn't have to be big. It can be a really small amount of effort that you put in. It can start so small, so easy, a new creative practice, a new round of therapy, a new conversation with a person that you didn't expect. Just starting by reading a book that you've never read before. Go ahead and comment your favorite book that scrambled your brain like scrambled eggs so that you can sow an intellectual seed for somebody else. All right, I want to tell you guys based on your rising sign which houses this is going to be lighting up for you because it's going to be going on from now through mid October, and I'm going to mention it many times over in the next few weeks. Just as a reminder, it starts with Mars, but then by September, Mercury comes in to form up this Grand Air Trine. The Sun comes in September to form up the Grand Air Trine. And then in October, Venus even comes into her domicile of Libra and forms it up as well. So if you're an air sign, this is going to be happening through whole sign houses in houses 1, 5, and 9. And that means that it's going to be a deeply personally illuminating transit. And the tone of it will depend on which of those planets is in your first house. But I would imagine a deeply creative and spiritual and seeking, pleasure seeking, but also visionary, truth, horizon seeking series of events that are going to really stoke and feed and support your sense of self. And any efforts that you put into any of those pursuits, finding things that bring you joy, doing creative things that make you happy, traveling, higher education, study, spiritual inquiry, or even just self development in its broadest sense, any amount of effort you put into those categories is going to yield an outsized result. If you're a water rising, this is going to be happening in houses 4, 8, and 12 in your natal chart. And those are some pretty liminal, ancestral, and deep spaces. I would not be surprised if what's going on here does not feel easy to identify or pin down. And it might really dive into the deepest parts of you. There may be something going on with ancestral, childhood stuff, stuff with your parents, or really just your foundational life experiences. And there could be a lot of stuff coming up that you aren't expecting, repressed things or things that just haven't been examined in a long time. The 12th house can feel a little bit like a basement of a house. It might be full of dark mold, might have a playroom in there, but these are some really liminal spaces. So I wouldn't put a lot of pressure on yourself to figure out what's going on or to name it. Now, water signs, if that sounds scary, don't forget that the air trines turn into water trines from October through December. So we'll be back giving you some more concrete news in a few months. Fire risings, this is happening in your houses 3, 7, and 11. And this is a deeply social series of transits. The air signs are always social. They are always collaborating. They are always gossiping and talking to other people and actually working in tandem with others. So this transit would be a really good time to invest anything you can, especially in the kind of social situations that bring you hope and optimism and ambition and that actually feed you in a soul driven way. Even investing in your community or your extended family or your neighborhood or digital spaces will be bringing you outsized results at this time. And finally, Earth risings. This is going to be happening, no surprise, across houses 2, 6, and 10. So, Earth risings, would you believe you're going to be focused on and thinking about work this fall? It almost seems cliche to tell an Earth rising that they are going to be focused on material security, but that is some part of what is happening here. But it might be that there is something very creative and that there is something very unexpected about the ways you are able to relate to your work and not just your career or the nature of the job you're doing, but your relationship to work generally, to the grind, to the burdens of work, to your values that you associate with work. This would be a really good time to think unconventionally wherever possible, challenge convention that you hold about your work and the ways that you're seen in the world and the ways that you show up energetically. We've reached the part of the show where I talk about how I, as a pagan animist, astrologer, human being, lady, am going to be using the astrology of this week. Well, I cannot shut up about it, but this Mercury retrograde has been absolutely catastrophic. I have had more reschedules for my client practice in the last 2 weeks than I have had in literally the entire time my business has been open to the world. My son is also going through a crazy sleep regression. He keeps waking up at 4:15. Last night he woke up at 2:30 and has been a sleepy little tyrant every moment since. So I'm going to be trying to use this week to harness some of the crazy brain energy that I have, and I'm not going to be asking too many questions about what it means. I know that I also have a really good natal relationship with Mars, and not everybody does. So for me, Mars entering my 10th house of career actually feels like a really good time to try to launch some things and get some things going. I have so many projects that I want to bring into the world under the umbrella of my astrology practice and also in my art practice, which feels less and less like a separate thing from my work and more like something I want to creatively integrate into my astrology work. So over the next few months, you can look for me on social media, on my newsletter, or on this very humble channel, integrating more of my personal art into what I do. I'm also in a Mars ruled year. So Mars is my perfection ruler for the year. So I have had an eye on this moment for a long time. My chart ruler is in Aquarius. My sun is in Gemini. So I feel like this transit is pretty personal for me. And I'm taking my own advice that I gave to Earth Risings to actually really think critically about the ways that I assign value to my work. A big debate that borders on group therapy that I've been having with some friends this week is whether or not I believe I have inherent value outside of my work because I was told that that was a thing a few weeks ago. And as a Capricorn rising, let me tell you, I had never once in my life considered that I could have innate value outside of the total product of all my accomplishments and all my work. Now, I consider my identity and the project of personality to be work in and of itself, sort of like in the Kierkegaard way. But I've been really chewing on this idea and it feels related to this Grand Air Trine. So I might try to do some writing about it. Speaking of writing, I'm also going to make sure that I'm journaling a little bit of what's going on this week, like I mentioned, because it does foreshadow that February 2027 eclipse. In terms of ritual or ceremonial practice on the full moon, I think that I'm going to go back and look at what was going on in my life for the new moon in Aquarius. Just take a look at what seeds I planted then and how they've come into fruition. All right, gorgeous people, we have reached that time of the show where my fancy little coffee is now blissfully empty, and so the show must be over. Please excuse my terrible British accent, but I'm leaving that in. Happy Air Trine week. Do something small for yourself, and I'll see you guys next week.